Okay, let's talk about my argumentative research essay and kind of how I organized it and what patterns I used. So first of all, I started with an anecdote, right? I figured when we learned in the last unit that narrative is a really powerful way to start, right? Starting with a story about yourself. And so I figured you guys already know me a little bit, and starting there would hopefully be interesting to you and also convincing because you might trust me, or you might start to see that I know a lot about pizza just by this. Instead of jumping into a topic you may be unfamiliar with some hardcore research. So I thought starting with narrative would be nice. And I first talk about growing up, eating pizza, middle school and high school, and loving it, but also loving to see my parents relaxed, right? They weren't stressed at dinner, which was nice. And then I jump into talking about my kids who popped up in the last essay, right? I wanted to bring them back, if I can, so you can see some connections there between my life and the writing that I do along the way. But I don't just talk about them. I talk about how now I know that stress-free feeling of getting some to-go food, right, and having it with my children. So it might seem like I'm jumping a lot because I'm going through time, back in middle school to present day, about 20 years later. But I have this connection here back to my parents. So hopefully you can see there's some connective tissue or transitions there. But, Gustavo Arellano in our mentor text uses narrative, right? He talks about growing up, why he loves tacos so much. So that's a trick I wanted to do as well. Okay, the next thing I do is I kind of define our terms. So we're not just talking about all kinds of pizza here, right? This isn't necessarily New York style or Chicago deep dish or Detroit style pizza. This is Neapolitan style pizza, which is in Naples is where pizza is supposed to originate from. So I kind of define what we're looking for. And I don't do the whole definition, but I do talk about how the pizza is cooked in the oven is very important. And then I give an example of how, or a couple of examples of how Il Forno matches that definition, that kind of pizza. And I thought, let's talk about pizza quickly. Everyone loves pizza. Let me give you some details, some imagery that might make you hungry, right? And start appealing to you, your hunger and your taste buds, and then just start convincing you subtly like that, right? Like brainwashing, something like that. So that's what I started with, and that's why I wanted to kind of slowly convince you just by appealing to the fact that most people love pizza, but I use a definition, an example to organize those ideas. Okay, so I didn't want to because I was worried that at first it might hurt my argument, but I felt like I couldn't show that I was an expert in pizza in the city or the restaurants in the city if I didn't talk about another really famous pizza joint, in this case, Dough. So I compare and contrast Il Forno, the restaurant I'm arguing for, with Dough, and kind of show how they're similar and how they're different. They both use the same kind of cooking methods with the oven, right? And even though Dough's been around longer, about 10 years longer, and gotten some more acclaim with Guy Fieri and such, the rebuttal is my argument to the counter argument that Dough might be better is that in the last review from the Express News, Il Forno got 2.5 stars and Dough only got 2. And those numbers sound really low, but I have a little footnote explanation on that scale. And those are actually really, really good reviews from the Express News. They're really tough critics. They're nationally acclaimed for that. So after my definition example, I compare and contrast with a rebuttal that Il Forno is in fact superior pizza. All right. After that, and honestly, I could have stopped there, but I just kept feeling there's something deeper here that I wanted to say, something more to say. And so the next thing I try to talk about is why this matters. Why do locally sourced ingredients matter, and why is it important to go to places like Il Forno who are doing this? And in there's a little bit of problem solution. So the restaurant business and the food industry in general have a lot of problems with not being great for the environment and not being socially equitable. So, the farther the food has to come to your plate from another country or whatever, or from another state, the worse impact it is on the environment and the less healthy the food is for you. And all of these industries have problems with equitable pay and equitable health insurance and other resources like that for their employees. So ranches and farms are famous for this. Restaurants are famous for this, especially when it comes to their restaurant servers, the waiters and waitresses, but also meat packing plants and other kind of restaurant or industries involved with the restaurant business, the people that deliver the ingredients that we use. And so, since that's a problem, the solution is to buy foods from the restaurants that do use locally sourced ingredients and other methods that are more equitable and better for the environment. So I don't go flat out and say it's problem solution, right? But it's there and it's subtle, and I hope you caught it. If not, maybe I need to revise that a little bit. Okay, and then in my conclusion, I go back to my introduction, right? I tie back to that idea from the beginning, or wrap around. These are different words we use for that. And I mentioned my boys again, right? This isn't a trick that you need to use. You could use a call to action. You could use another anecdote. You could use a famous quote. There's a lot of things you can do to end your paper, right, for your conclusion. But I think it's nice when you do this kind of reference to something from the beginning. So I talk about my children again and eating meals together, and then take it to another or deeper level. So I don't just want them to have fond memories of eating with me and enjoy pizza like I do, and maybe one day El Forno. They're not ready for that yet. But I want them to be thoughtful about what they purchase and who they purchase it from, and what those purchases mean for the environment and society at large. And I hope they get that from me and my wife Laura eventually. So, tie back, but go somewhere else with it. Go try to take it deeper if you can. So that's the overall flow of my paper. Now, a couple things. Your paper does not need to be as long as mine. It might be a little shorter, it might be a little longer, right? And you don't need as much research as I do. I think I have 5 to 7 sources here. And that's probably overkill, but I kept feeling I needed to add more. I kept feeling I needed to talk about another restaurant, so I had to do research about that restaurant. Felt like I needed to talk about the importance of locally sourced foods, so I had to do some research there. But 2, 3 sources is probably enough to show that you've done your research, you know what you're talking about, and you have some credibility there. So don't let that scare you if you read this and you thought, oh my gosh, it's got so many sources. All right. The last thing I want to talk about with you is research placement and the fact that it matters. So at the end, when I'm talking about the importance of locally sourced food, which is kind of the last big part before I get to the conclusion, I have a couple different sources here that are talking about different things. One is environment, and that's impact and how healthy it is for you. And then the other one is social justice and equity. And I kept playing with this back and forth. I kept moving them because these are both big issues. And you could argue either one is more important, right? But just based on what's going on right now, currently, right, in our times, you hear about social justice all the time, that I just felt like that was the best way to end my paper. That was the way to connect to more people, give it more immediacy, make it more current, more real. And so that's why I decided to end with that piece. But I could have gone either way. So that research placement mattered, right? I hope that strengthened my argument a little bit more by ending with that. The idea of social justice and equity, rather than little moves there, but all the moves we're making as writers matter. All right, so those are some things to think about as you go back and look at your paper and you think about how you organized it and where your research is.